Well, welcome to Lindsley Avenue's Wednesday night Bible class. Thank you for joining us, again, whether you're live or watching at some point later. This is lesson 2 in a series we just started last week that I've called Why I Believe. I kind of like that title because it's hard for anybody to argue with anything I say, because whether you accept it or not, it's why I think the way I do. And the goal of this class is simply to go through, why do I believe there's a God? And I intend to throw as much spaghetti at the wall as possible, because if something that I view as a good argument doesn't stick for you, then maybe the next thing will. The goal is simply, in my view, to have one thing that sticks and says, I can't dismiss that, because that's the goal. Hopefully there's a lot of them. Hopefully they all make sense, but we all have different ways of approaching the subject. Some may be more philosophical, some may be more scientific, some may be more emotional, or whatever it is. I don't care what background somebody comes from or what orientation they have. The goal, whenever I want to talk about this, is to simply explain, well, here's what I think, and maybe something will click. That's the goal. Last week was an introductory class. Tonight we're jumping into the first broad kind of category of arguments. It's a bit more philosophical and scientific to an extent, but it's a very good one. It's a very strong one, I believe. It's called the cosmological argument. It doesn't necessarily have as much to do with the cosmos, the stars and the galaxies, but it's about the need for a beginning. And so we'll start off here. Again, the key passage for this is for all of us to be ready to give a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. So at the very least, I hope it causes us all to think through why you believe, why we believe, so that if you come across someone who's struggling or who says, that's a bunch of hooey, you at least could give a reasoned, relaxed discussion and answer for why you have a hope within you. So let's go ahead and get started off here. The cosmological argument for the existence of God is generally thought to be one of the strongest philosophical arguments available for the existence of God. It appears in several forms, and you'll see different variations on the same basic argument, each of which I think adds an additional perspective. And it's good to have that, again, as I say, because if the first form of this argument doesn't do anything for you, the second form might, the third form might. So here we go. It's the idea of a first cause. So the syllogism, the A, B, and then the C, says everything that begins to exist has a cause for its existence. The universe began to exist. If those two are true, then the universe had to have a cause. That's the way the syllogism works. A implies B, and if you say B, therefore A. So that's the way it goes. So the universe, if it began to exist, everything that begins to exist has a cause, the universe has a cause. So let's talk about this first one. Everything that begins to exist does so at some point in time. Okay? And prior to that time, all points of time, so to speak, are the same. So the fact that it comes into existence right here requires something to cause it to be there, as opposed to a week earlier or some eon earlier. There has to be something that determines why it comes into existence right here. For example, the chairs that we're sitting in. They have not been here forever. Some of them appear to be, that we have sat in before on the front stage, but they haven't been here forever. They weren't here for Alexander the Great to sit in. Why were they here 50 years ago, 10 years ago? Well, something caused them to come into existence right then. And that would have been the manufacturer deciding to make something at that time, or something to that effect. So it required a cause. This argument's very tough to argue against, because it requires you to deny it, to say, no, something comes into existence without a cause, and that is not human experience. Everything that exists now that did not used to exist has a cause. Like this building. This was not here, I suspect, in 1700 AD. Why is it here now? Somebody decided to build it. That was the cause that ended up having this building be assembled. You and I weren't here 100 years ago. None of us are 100 years old. And the reason we are here is because there was a cause for us to come into existence, the love of our parents and their desire to have a child. So it's the universal experience of humanity that nothing begins to exist without a cause. And so the universe is something physical, and so you have to argue that, well, no, that's a special case. The usual rules don't apply here, and to try to deny this argument's validity. Now, anything, therefore, that begins to exist has to have a cause. All it takes is one counterexample to throw that out the window. One thing that just pops into existence without a cause. Okay? And there aren't any. There really aren't any. In the second place, the second point, right, the B, the universe had a beginning. 150 years ago, science would have strongly denied that. The scientific theories of the day said that the universe was self-existing and eternal. It had no beginning. Christians in Christianity, the Judeo-Christian way of thinking, said that's wrong. In the beginning, God created. Now, we're not arguing right here for the God of the Bible. Remember, we're not doing that. But divinity and the idea of creation has been around a long time, and it argued against everything being eternal. Well, what's happened in the last 150 years? Science has come around to say, well, no, that's true. The universe has not always been here. They give an age for the universe. Now, people might want to quibble, argue over what that age is, but when they say 14.2 billion years, no matter how big a number that is, it's still a starting point. And any starting point requires a cause. So, to an extent, this is a really hard argument to dispute. So, if you think about this too, the universe had a beginning. I like this one. This will remind you, unfortunately, of like 7th and 8th grade math. Apologies. Logically, it is not possible for the past to be infinitely long. It can't go into the past an infinite distance because, we'll talk about this in a bit, it's come to an end right here, which would mean you would have an actual collection of past infinite moments. And it's just not possible. I'll talk about that in just a minute. So you can't have an actual infinity of anything, despite the fact that you may have thought that way when you were in English class taking a test or something like that. So therefore, if these two statements are true, that everything that begins to exist has a cause, and the universe began to exist, the universe has to have a cause. And what we simply do here is we say, whatever this cause is or was, we call that God. And again, we don't point to the Bible yet at this point. We're just going to say whatever this cause is, we're just going to use God. You could call it any other term you want. First cause is fine. But then you'll have to think and be asking, do we know anything about this first cause? So it's kind of arbitrary what you call it. Here's the actual argument on the basis of the impossibility, I love these big words, the impossibility of having an actual infinite. An actual infinite cannot exist. Think about it, right? You can have 15 pieces of chocolate on the table. You can't have an infinite number of pieces of chocolate because, for one thing, it wouldn't be a number because it is not a number. An infinite is uncountable, all this kind of stuff, right? And so since you can't actually assemble an infinite, you can't get there by putting one extra piece of chocolate on the table. An infinite temporal regress, I need to figure out a better way to say this now. An infinite temporal regress of past events would be an actual infinite. Okay? We've all gone through today. I mean, a few minutes ago, it was 2 after 7. It was 6:58, 6:57. Those are past events. Well, but we are in the now at 7:11, right? 7:12 has not occurred yet, right? So this past event set of past events has come to an end right now. I can't have an infinite past because I would have the entire collection of an infinite existing right here, right now. So an infinite temporal regressive events cannot exist. Can't do it. Can't have an infinite past because the past is over right now because we're in the present. Here's another way of thinking about it. Successive addition, thinking about the chocolate. A collection formed by successive addition, putting one piece of chocolate on the table after another, you can never have an infinite number of chocolates, or whatever that would mean, because there would always be more chocolates to add. So you can't get there, math, calculus stuff. But the problem again is the temporal regress of past events is an actual infinite if it goes back infinitely into the past. And so it's added to 1/2 second or whatever at a time, it won't work. So therefore, the temporal set of past events in the past, all the little moments that we all want to cherish and all that stuff, cannot be an infinite set of past events. You can't have an infinite past. It's not possible because it's over right now. 10 a.m. tomorrow morning is not part of the past yet, right? But if the world exists till noon tomorrow, you've added that 10 a.m. moment to the set of past events, and you're forming an infinite by adding more things to it. It won't work. Another ways of thinking about it, again, if one of those two is like, what? Other ways of trying to say the same thing, events that occur are ordered in series. They occur in sequence. Likely most of us went to first grade before we went to second grade, before we went to 8th grade, all these kind of things, right? Events that occur are ordered in series. There was one president in 1900, and another president in 1908, things like that. There's an order to things. Here's something again, nothing causes itself to occur. That has to be true because I can't cause myself to occur before I actually exist. Right? That seems kind of odd, but I can't not be here, then somehow I cause myself to exist. That doesn't work. And everything that is caused is therefore caused by something else. Again, think of you, right? You are here not because you caused yourself to appear, right? But because of your parents who wanted a child. And that's the cause for why you are here, it's why I'm here. There's a cause. Since I can't cause myself, something else had to cause me. However, the series of events and causes can't go on infinitely into the past. You can't have that same infinite past because that's an actual infinite. Therefore, there has to be a first cause somewhere there in the past. Now, here's the way to think about this. 7th and 8th grade math. Remember those things? What do we call that? Points to anybody that remembers what that was. Other than you for a moment.
What are you talking about?
This line here on the bottom of the screen. That has the name from 7th or 8th grade math. Anybody other than this individual?
I would answer that question. I was going to ask something.
No, what
You talking about an arrow?
It is an arrow, but in math class it has a different.
The number line?
Yield.
The number line is usually the thing that goes both directions, and it goes infinite this way and infinite that way. But this one, we put a little dot over there on the end of it, and we called it
Axis.
and that's the number ray. Is what it was called.
What?
Number ray, R-A-Y.
Oh, narrative.
Okay. Now, the way we usually did that is we would start that thing at like 0, and the teacher would draw it out way out into the far number future hinterlands out there, right? And so you have 0, 1, 2, 3, and then you just keep going forever. Now, if you think about that, if I start here at 0, suppose I'm going to walk to the end of the number ray. Will I ever get there? Can I ever get there? Why? Because it's infinite. So I can't start here and walk to the end, right? All right. The same principle exists if you turn the thing around backward. If I had gotten here, did I ever start walking? Now think about that. If I'm right here at 0, hey, look at this, I finally managed to get to 0 on the number ray. Did I ever start walking? No, because it's an infinite distance that way. There's no way I would ever get here. And that's that idea of you can't have an infinite number of past events. If it makes sense going to the future or to the large end of the number ray, that if you start at 0, you'll never get to the end of the number ray, right? And I think all of us understand that idea. If you turn the thing around and start at 0 and try to walk backward, do it that way, right? You're going to start at 0 and you're going to take backward steps. Will you ever get to the end of the line? No, because there is no end. So you can't have an end here if you've been walking backward your entire. You're never going to get to the end of an infinite number ray. Does that make sense? This is important. If you start at 0, are you ever going to get to the end if it goes on infinitely into the future? No. So all I'm saying is turn it backwards. If you've been walking forever, will you ever get to zero? No, because you're still there in infinity minus one, whatever that would mean. You'll never get to where you are now. We can't deal with infinites. Infinites, an actual infinite, cannot exist. But if the universe has never had a beginning, then we have an actual infinite amount of past seconds in days, in years, billions or otherwise, that is over right now. So the collection of all past moments is an infinite set. It's like getting to the end of the number line. You can't do that. You have a question?
I did. So you're arguing this with somebody that doesn't believe in God. All this, you can't have it in the past. The question that's going to come up is, well, then explain how God is infinite. Explain how he goes back.
If you look up here again, we've been talking about physical things. The universe is physical.
Right.
That's a different kind of thing. Well, all you're saying is there had to be something that started. I haven't said anything about God being infinite yet. That's what I would do. I would put that off. The question is, somebody says, well, how can God be infinite?
Well, that's going to be complete, right? They're going to be like, okay, well, if God created this, how's he not infinite? Where'd he come from?
Well, the whole key would be whatever exists here, whatever created it, can't be part of the here.
Unless we use the Mormon book.
No. We don't.
No,
we don't call names out.
He says in
Again, we're not appealing to the Bible yet either.
he says that I was always
From everlasting to everlasting.
I was always there.
Again, but the whole key is, remember,
he invented basically time was invented.
the universe is a physical creation, right? And it had a beginning, otherwise you've got an infinite set of past events. So whatever this first cause is, can't be sitting on a planet somewhere because it doesn't work that way. So that automatically would exclude the idols of the Canaanites. That would automatically exclude something that would sit on a table as being the first cause that created everything. Okay? So the only possible creator would be something that would have nothing physical about it. Okay? So again, think of the number line going forward into the future. Will you ever get to the end of it? If the answer to that is no, then if the number line is turned around and it has an end here, will there ever have been a starting point? The answer to that also has to be no. You can't have an actual collection of infinites. You don't like that? How about this one? We live in a world of movement. I think that's probably a true statement. Everybody move your arm up and down. Right? Everybody's still moving. That's good. Everybody's still moving. Some of us aren't. But we live in a world of movement. Nothing moves in and of itself. Something always causes the movement. Now, if my arm moves, the arm hopefully is not moving on its own. It's my brain sending impulses to the arm. Think about Newton and his laws. A body at rest stays at rest unless acted upon by an external force. Same way, an object that's in motion will stay in motion unless you deflect it. Newton's laws work, right? Something causes the movement. Therefore, there must be a first mover. Something had to move first. And it can't be something physical because nothing moves itself. There had to be a first mover. So consider, right? A watch isn't going to do you much good without a spring or a battery, even if it had an infinite number of gears. So that's not really very helpful, right? In the same way, a train can't move, without an engine, no matter how many cars are on the track. So adding a lot of stuff or having a lot of things doesn't help you. There has to be some first cause of motion. And that first mover we're going to call God. So it doesn't help, as I say, to say I can move myself, right? Because again, it's impulses. It's using energy, converting to energy and by adenosine triphosphate and all that kind of stuff in your body to cause motion and all this kind of stuff. Nothing moves in itself. If something were on this table and it moved, and I said, look at that, it moved itself, you'd be thinking, no, there's a magic trick going on here, right?
Ghost.
I mean, that's the way you might think a ghost, but even then that would be something doing something to it, and I don't believe in ghosts. But if it were, you go to a fair and something moves on a table, you're looking under the table because everybody knows nothing moves by itself. There's some force that acts upon something.
So, going back to the line.
I knew you were wanting to go back to the line, I can tell.
I must have missed that day in class. I can tell. But
It's too long ago.
when you have that line going from right to left,
Whoops. Yep.
where wasn't God then at the beginning? Yes.
Yeah.
The beginning
But that is the beginning of the physical universe.
of
That's the key, it's the physical universe. We're talking here about the physical universe cannot go infinitely into the past. Okay? There has to be something that brought the physical universe into existence. We don't know what that something is at this point in the discussion. We're simply saying the universe hasn't always been here.
So
That is
isn't
not
that the
possible.
beginning of the point, though?
What's that?
Isn't that the beginning?
That is when the universe came into existence, right there. That beginning of the point.
And it goes the other way.
But going this way, I'm trying to say, this is trying to do, for the beginning of the universe, it would be, and then coming to today, right? But it can't be like the number line in school. It can't have arrows in both directions because there's no way you ever get to where you are.
Back when you get to the beginning.
You do for the universe. You do for the universe. That was something that moved itself by itself. You do get to a beginning for the universe, and that's the whole point. The universe had a beginning. And if the universe had a beginning, right, there had to be a cause, because anything that begins to exist has a cause for its existence. Right?
yeah. So the arrow down there is what Brett is talking about.
Okay, we can always rewind the tape to talk about it more. Let's switch to the next one here. This one's a little tougher for me, but I never put things past what might help somebody, so I give this version. There's a sufficient reason for existence. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why is there anything as opposed to nothing? There has to be an answer to that question, because nothing happens without a sufficient reason. Again, why is this wad of aluminum foil here? Well, it is there because there was a sufficient reason. Hunger drove him to take it apart. That's the reason there's crumpled foil right here. Nothing happens without a reason or a cause, really. Nothing that is visible could cause itself to exist. Nothing physical, because we've already said anything that begins to exist has a cause, and you can't cause yourself to exist. Therefore, there has to be something that is not visible that caused visible things to exist. This one stays more in the mind of the philosopher, I think. Arguing against this is essentially like arguing that when you see a thing of dominoes falling, you can go to YouTube or something, and there's some really dramatic things. If I start the YouTube video at like 10 seconds in, and I say, these dominoes have been falling forever, you would think I needed a rest. Because that's not possible. It is not possible for dominoes to have been falling an infinitely long time in the past. That's what the argument is if you say the universe did not have a beginning. And what caused that first domino to fall over? Somebody went, or if you don't see somebody do it, a waft of wind came through the room and everybody's screaming, no, not yet, because they've ruined their months-long prep. Or there was an earthquake tremor you didn't notice. I mean, the house settled. Dominoes in motion require a first domino to be tipped over. There has to have been that first domino tipped over, right? And you can't have an actual infinite number of dominoes. It doesn't work. You can't have it. How do you have an infinite number of dominoes? I want to see that video. So even then, there had to be a cause, right? Sometimes it'll be a 4-year-old that goes in and, oh, dominoes, knocks them over, and you hear the screams coming. If someone responds that it fell because it was unbalanced or a puff of wind, you're still saying there's a cause. I don't care what the cause is, and I haven't said what the cause is. We're using the term we're calling God for the cause, but whatever it is, there is a first cause for everything to come into existence. It has to be uncaused by definition. When we capitalize this as first cause, if there was a cause to this first cause, you got the same problem. You'd have an infinite number of first causes. Another set of dominoes that went back infinitely long, you can't have it. There has to be an initial cause, whatever that is, for everything to exist. And here I've got my little big picture of the dominoes there, right? The universe is not a series of dominoes that's been falling forever. It doesn't work that way. So if the universe began but had no cause, then something physical came into existence through purely physical means somehow. Came into existence. Poof. Right? When you think of, I Dream of Jeannie or something like that, right? Jeannie would do this. Did Major Nelson just really appear right in front of her? Whoa. He wasn't there and now he is. You know that wasn't true. That cannot happen. It would have been a stop motion on the camera. That's how the special effect worked. And if somebody did do it, right, you're still moving physical thing to physical thing. He's not coming into existence from nothing. We're just talking teleportation or whatever from Jeannie's powers. It violates, having something come into existence without a cause violates the basic law of cause and effect, which is what everybody agrees with. We've talked about this before. Somebody says, how'd you get that black eye? I don't know, it just suddenly appeared. You think the person needs a rest. Things don't happen that way. They just don't. In fact, it was this point of cause and effect that convinced Einstein that there had to be some first cause, even though he never made the step to identify that first cause with a personal God. He never made that step. But he had believed there had to be cause and effect. Now, quantum mechanics, I really don't intend to get into this, but quantum mechanics certainly gives the appearance of not having cause and effect relationships. In fact, all the time you have antiparticle pairs that come into existence and then annihilate themselves. They call them virtual particles because they really, think of something that just kind of keeps doing this, they kind of split apart and they come back. But that's not coming from out of nothing. It's still coming from out of a quantum field. That's what physicists will tell you. Well, where did the quantum field come from? I mean, it's not nothing. You still got a field, right? You have a magnetic field, you have an electric field, you got this quantum field. You can't get away from something existing that could not have existed forever. It just doesn't work. So these forms of the cosmological argument all argue there has to be a first cause, a first mover, a first reason, whatever that may be. And so I really believe that this is the best way to think of it. The universe has a cause for its existence because everything that begins to exist requires a cause. Nothing comes into existence causeless. And since we exist in the present, there can't be an infinite past stretching behind us, because then you would have an infinite collection of stuff. Since there is something rather than nothing, there has to be a reason why there's something. Okay? And since there is motion, there had to be something that caused the first motion. Again, think of it as an elephant, and this is just rotating the camera and trying to explain the elephant from some different viewpoints. First cause, first reason, first mover, can't have an actual infinite past. All of them suggest that since the universe began, something had to cause it. I've got a little bit of coffee left in this cup. At least there was the last time I looked. If it disappeared without a cause, that's also a potential problem. Where did the coffee come from? It's always existed. The coffee never came into existence. Again, you would think I needed a rest. Okay? If it came into existence, it had a cause. Now, the immediate cause was somebody making the coffee. The cause before that was somebody planting the coffee. Right? The cause before that was the mama and daddy coffee bean causing another coffee bean to be born in the world, and so on, right? Is there an infinite stretch of coffee plants? No. There is still a first cause for anything that begins to exist. And this argument usually dissolves with what Brett says. People want to kind of push off to the side and argue automatically about the Christian concept of God. But discussions over the theology and the nature of God don't detract at all from the fact that the universe has not always been here, and that requires some cause for the universe to come into existence. In each case, we're simply going to call the first cause God. If that really gets under people's skin, and sometimes it might, leave it as first cause. You still have to try to think through what is this first cause and what does that mean for anything. Now here's the other side of it. Sometimes people want it to, it just gets under their, it messes with them when they think about whether there was really a beginning or not. The sun was apparently out today. I'm not sure I saw the actual hot disk of the sun, but it was out there. Driving home, I saw this brighter, semicircular thing behind some clouds, so I assume that was the sun I saw. But the sun is out tomorrow. When you look at it, think about the fact of the sun. What is the sun? It's a vast fusion reactor fusing hydrogen into helium in immense amounts. Essentially, it's a giant fire, right? A giant fire. Well, and it burns, what is that? 560 million tons of hydrogen are turned into helium every second. That's a lot of stuff getting fused every single second. You can measure this makeup of hydrogen by doing a spectroscopic analysis, passing the light of the sun through a prism and the absorption lines of hydrogen, helium, and some other elements in the sun. So you can tell this is what they're going after with fusion reactors. They haven't been able to get it figured out yet. Now here's the problem. How long has the sun been there? Well, if someone were to suggest it's always been there, there's a problem. How many of you, just raise hand, how many of you have ever had like a fireplace or at least been around a fireplace or a campfire? I thought about actually, we would have violated safety rules in here, but I thought about bringing a match. Just striking a match and holding it up. If you got one, keep them in your pocket. And I was just going to talk and let the thing burn. And keep talking and let the thing burn. Assuming it would have just burned forever. Right? What would have happened? I would have gotten not a hot foot, but a hot finger. Because fires go out unless you do two things, right? Really one thing. You just got to put more fuel on the fire. I was thinking you could put it out yourself, but you just need more fuel. So if you have a fireplace, you might stoke it and get it to burn whatever's left, or a little better. But you start a fire, oh, it's been 6 months. Why is the fire not burning in the fireplace? Well, hello, it's because you don't have any more firewood put on it. You've got to put more fuel in there. Well, the sun, as immense as it is, it's gargantuan in size, does not have an infinite amount of hydrogen. One of these days, scientists tell us 4 or 5 billion years from now, it's going to run out. And then what's it going to do? Well, it actually will start fusing helium for a while. It gets harder. It'll fuse helium and eventually get up to where it's fusing up to iron. And then, because it doesn't have enough gravitational energy, it'll conk out. The sun will eventually go out, just like the fire in your fireplace. So when you see it tomorrow, the fact that the sun's still on fire tells me what? It hasn't been there forever. It hasn't been there forever. There's no way for the sun to have been there forever. Now, the earth hasn't been here forever either. In Iceland here recently, there was a volcanic explosion. Lava was coming out. I wanted to go get some. I thought about going over and scooping some up with my hand and just carrying it home with me. Well, what would a problem have been, right? It's hot. Customs as well, right? I'd have to explain. It's incredibly hot. Well, the earth is still hot inside. Have you ever had something hot that you had food or oven, right? Especially like, suppose you baked a baked potato for a year. You know, and you had it in this oven that was 5,000 degrees. It's going to be a cinder block, I know, but it's going to be pretty doggone hot when it comes out of the oven, right? If you set it there and come back to it in 1,000 years, is it still hot? Eventually, it would have cooled off. If I take too long to eat something, it comes out of the oven or the microwave hot, but eventually it's cold. You know, you get a Big Mac or a pizza. If you leave it out on the shelf for a month, it's not hot anymore. Things cool off. The fact that the earth is still hot inside says it hasn't been here forever, or else it should be what? Cooled off inside. I mean, the earth's pretty big, so the earth hasn't been here forever. The sun hasn't been here forever. Okay, yeah, but there are all these stars in the universe. The sun may not have been here forever, but look at all the stars. What are the stars? They're essentially the same thing as the sun, some bigger, some smaller. They're just really far away. That's why they look like little pinpricks in the sky. What are they? They are massive fusion engines burning hydrogen into helium or helium into other substances, and they're on fire just like the sun. The fact that you see any stars at all says, what about the stars? They haven't been here forever either, or the fire would have gone out. Well, okay, fine. The Milky Way galaxy, which is what we're in, has all these stars. That's what you see out here anyway. Okay, Gene, so great. The Milky Way hasn't been here forever, but there are all these billions of galaxies that the James Webb Telescope and all these, the Hubble Telescope have taken pictures of. The Andromeda Galaxy that's 2 million light years away, and all these other ones even further. All those, what are they made up of? Stars. How are those generating energy and light? Fusing hydrogen into helium. It's the same thing. The fact that the universe is not completely dark and cold and an absolute minimum temperature says it has not been here forever. A beginning to the universe is really not deniable. In fact, to get around it, scientists, one in particular, found it very disconcerting to have a beginning. And so to get around it, he ended up needing to invoke imaginary time. You'd have imaginary numbers, which were useful in electrical engineering and some of that kind of stuff. Imaginary time, and like, what does that really mean? I might have had an imaginary friend as well. So a beginning to the universe makes a lot more sense than not having a beginning. It just doesn't. So again, as I say here, if it had been using hydrogen forever, it would have burned out by now. So you can't have the sun always be in existence. Next time you see it burning in the sky, that's testimony right there to the fact that the sun hasn't always been here. As I say, the existence of stars in the universe, they're just faraway suns. And so when you see those looking through telescope, binocular, or just out in the country, if you ever manage to get away from city lights, same thing there. As I say, the heat inside the earth, when you read about see on the news about a volcano going off, well, it's a shame they're getting hit by these ice cold rocks coming out of the interior of the earth. Well, they're not. They're getting hit by burning magma as it expelled from the middle of the earth. The earth has not always been here either. It just doesn't work that way. Then you get to this, the second law of thermodynamics. Suppose you had a kitchen. I get home and the inside of the house, oops, the heat was off today, is 35 degrees. I'm freezing. 35 degrees. So what I decided to do is to heat up an oven to 350 degrees. That apparently seems like you cook everything at 350. I don't know why. Why 350 turned out to be the magical temperature? I don't understand. But if you got this oven at 350, right? And so the oven is at 350. If you leave and open, you turn it off, turn off the oven, okay? You leave and open the oven door and you go out. So it's 35 degrees in the house or the apartment or whatever. Oven's 350 inside and you open the door. The oven's off. When you come back later, what's the deal going to be? The room will have reached an equilibrium temperature, depending on when you come back, somewhere between 35 degrees and 350. The room may only be 37 when you spread that 350 degrees of the oven, depends on how big the room is. But things spread out. It all gets mixed up together. When you put, and things go from an ordered state, heat in the oven, cold in the room, to more an equilibrium where everything's spread out. You had some coffee. I put in some creamer in the coffee. You ever tried to be really, really careful when you put creamer in the coffee? So the coffee looks black, but you know there's creamer in it, right? Well, what happens the moment you put a spoon in and do this? Can you ever get black to having all the black coffee showing again? No. You go to one of the fancy coffee places, your son, and it gives you this heart on the top of it because I know he loves me so much, right? Scoutmasters. I see that heart. Once I take a sip, I never get the heart back. So it goes from an ordered state to disordered. I have been going to a more and more disordered state physically for the last X number of years. That's called aging.
It's the creamer.
Was the creamer, perhaps, or the plastics. So things go from an ordered state to a disordered state, in a closed state. I could heat up my house or my apartment if I went in and I did something to it, added something to it, brought in some magma, put it in the vase in the middle of the apartment. That would warm up the apartment. But if it's a locked room, It may be hot in one corner and cold everywhere else, but it gets to an equilibrium. Okay? And so the universe itself is a closed system. There's no outside to get more stuff in. Okay? And so if the universe had always been in existence, everything should be the same everywhere. You wouldn't have a hot spot with a star and real cold on the backside of Pluto or something like that. Just like in a house, it would reach that equilibrium of 37 degrees. That's not what you observe. We see hot spots and cold spots. Again, the whole point is the universe has not always been here, has not always existed. There's the little thing from NASA talking about the second law of thermodynamics. We'll leave that as is. This quoted law says that entropy or disorder always increases. Left to itself,
There you go. That's the number one law right there.
it's the second law of thermodynamics, but nobody ever remembers the first one. So think about what your house looks like. I'm not asking for pictures. Okay, the inside of your house. Somebody comes over to visit. People usually will try to clean their house up. Does it stay that way? No, it doesn't. Over time, what happens? It gets to a more and more disordered state. You can spend energy to clean it up. You can get the vacuum out. You can spend an hour picking things up from where they have gotten to and trying to put them back, but that's more energy. Without extra energy put into the system, without you working, doing some work, it gets disordered. And so it's a zero-sum game, right? Even if you put energy into it, you still expended work, so you never get back to where you were. So suppose this is the way my house is. This is the way it is when my wife leaves to go out of town. Not too bad. This is me doing the vacuum, not her. Okay, so if it looks like that, now she's gone for a week, she comes back, and here's what she walks into. Okay, this is the natural order of the house. It goes from this to this. This is the way the body looks when you're 20. This is the way it looks now. It gets more and more disordered. It's what it does. I had hair at some point in the past. I did.
Where'd that cat?
Even you did, I think.
I know about the cat.
Okay. The what? The cat appeared. The cat was uncaused. It came into existence from out of nowhere.
Oh my God.
That's right.
What about the green walls? Who picked that out?
I'm not talking about the color walls. Here's some more things too. Let's talk about the structure of the universe. Everywhere astronomers look, the universe seems to be spreading apart. Okay, the recession of the galaxies. The best way to think about this is if you have a balloon that's this big and you put dots on it, on the outside of the balloon, and each dot represents a galaxy. So here's the size of the universe, whatever that means. What happens when you blow air in the balloon? It does this, right? And any dot on the balloon would seem to now be further away from every other dot. The universe appears to be expanding, or at least the galaxies seem to be running away from each other. Well, suppose I film blowing the balloon up. For fun, what if I then take that video and I run it backwards? What does it look like? Well, if the universe is doing this now, scientists, not religious people, had this idea that, you know, if it's doing this, if I ran the video backwards, so to speak, at some point, everything would have been in a tiny little pinprick of a spot. And they said, they call that the Big Bang. The Big Bang is supposedly when the universe was...
Yeah, but he
started
said in
expanding.
Isaiah that I stretch out the heavens like the curtain.
Well, and again, we're not going to the Bible yet. I understand you can go to the Bible and look for some of the same statements. Well, we're not trying to do that. I'm simply saying the universe is expanding, run the tape backward, and it would have been smaller and smaller and smaller, and eventually you're going to get to where there's no point at all, kind of thing, right? So if it's expanding now, if you ran time backward, it would look like it's going back into the past. And so they call that this Big Bang singularity where they can't make predictions anymore. They get to a divide by zero, so to speak, and they can't tell what it really should have done. So the Big Bang theory, by the way, the Big Bang theory assumes a first point. They actually take it to 10 to the minus 43 seconds. 10 to the minus 2 seconds would be 1/100th of a second. So there's a decimal point, 42 zeros, and a 1 seconds. And that's as far back as theory can take them now. But that's as close to zero as it needs to get. No matter what, you still get to a point where there was nothing. There's no time, so you really can't get to time zero, but You got something coming to existence that wasn't there before. Here's the balloon idea, right? So the universe appears to be kind of doing that. Even more strangely, it seems to be getting faster, spreading apart faster now, and it's really hard to explain. And there's the picture. See this little dot right here, this little square? This image is a zoomed in of that where the Hubble telescope took a long time exposure.
Wow.
It seems pretty blank, but look at all these stars and galaxies out there. The universe is an immense place, and it's all doing this. It's all doing this. So the expansion of the universe, the heat inside the Earth, the fact that the moon being smaller appears to be cold. There aren't volcanoes on the moon. It's cold. There are all volcanoes on the moons of Jupiter, but that's Jupiter's tidal forces tearing the moons apart, causing them to stay molten on the inside. You don't get to where something is hot, burning, on fire, moving, that's been doing that forever. It just doesn't happen. Stephen Hawking, talked about him a minute ago. His counterpart, Roger Penrose, came up with this space-time theory. And so they said as long as general relativity is true, gravity should cause space-time to have a beginning and maybe an end. The space-time theorem that Stephen Hawking, as I recall, won a Nobel Prize for, Roger Penrose, said that space-time, the universe, had a beginning as long as general relativity is true. It's the most tested theorem there's ever been, general relativity. Now, they didn't like that because if you've got a beginning, what does that call for? The stuff we've been talking about. People start thinking about a first cause. They start thinking about a first mover. They may start thinking about a God. We can't have that, and so they dedicated a lot of time, Stephen Hawking did, to try to figure out a way around that, and hence he came to imaginary time. Strangely enough, his counterpart, Roger Penrose, has a generally Christian viewpoint. So pretty interesting. So we'll keep going over that. No one really cares about that kind of stuff. So let's come back to this. Look at what Hawking said here. I don't demand a theory talking about imaginary time. I don't demand a theory that corresponds to reality because I don't know what reality is. Well, I would tend to think most of us ought to have a reasonable field of reality. I tend to think you're sitting about 10 feet away from me, but can I prove 100% that you're there? I cannot. Remember, we talked about that last week. One more theory, one more quote here. This is on the handout, it's not on the page. This is from Robert Jastrow, who calls himself an agnostic, by the way. He's not sure there's a God or not. He says, I'm an agnostic in religious matters. However, I am fascinated by strange developments going on in astronomy, partly because of their religious implications and partly because of the peculiar reactions of my colleagues. Theologians are generally very happy, delighted with the proof that the universe had a beginning. No surprise, right? But astronomers are curiously upset that the universe had a beginning. Their reactions provide an interesting demonstration of the response of the scientific mind, supposedly very objective, when presented with evidence uncovered by science that itself leads to a conflict with articles of faith in our profession. What article of faith? Naturalism. God can't figure into anything. Science doesn't work by saying God's the one that moved it. You try to explain something physically. Naturalism. It turns out that the scientist behaves the way the rest of us do when our beliefs are in conflict with the evidence. We become irritated, we pretend the conflict does not exist, or we paper over it with meaningless phrases like imaginary time. Okay? So the theologians are delighted, generally, that science came up with this idea that the universe had a beginning. They don't deny it. But the scientists were infuriated by it because it's going to give an end to these people that want to talk about a first cause. Well, it is what it is. And unless you have an infinite past and an infinite future, if you have a beginning, you've got to have some cause for the universe to have a beginning. That is essentially the cosmological argument. So what I would suggest is, which is more reasonable to believe? That the universe had a beginning, right? Think about the sun being on fire. Think about the earth still being hot. Think about all the stars being on fire. And if the universe had been here forever, why are they still burning? haven't they burned up all the wood yet, so to speak? Right? Think about the fire in your house. No matter how much you have to, how do you have an infinite number of logs outside to keep the fire going forever? You can't do it. So the universe can't keep burning forever either, or that the universe has been here forever. I tend to think that it's more reasonable to think that the universe had a beginning. With that being true, there has to be a cause for the universe to have a beginning. You can't get around that necessity for a cause, because everything that begins to exist has a cause. The only way around it is to say, well, everything that begins to exist has a cause except for the universe. And that's called special pleading, when you want to carve out one thing as an exception to it. You cannot think of something that begins to exist that does not have a cause, because everything that began to exist at some point had a cause. This printout, right? Somebody said, click print, and the printout came into existence. Everything came into existence. I was not here in 1950. My dad was. He was not here in 1850. You see what I mean? Anything that begins to exist, and it applies to everything that is physical, that would include the universe as a whole. That's the cosmological argument. Now, the good news is, if you're still sitting there and you're thinking about the number line going, there's a lot of other ways to talk about the necessity for a beginning and the necessity for a God. Christian evidences, or why I believe. This one is focused a great deal on the physical sciences. Next week, we're going to switch gears completely and talk about, personally, my most effective argument to me, which is called the moral argument. The moral argument. And it has a lot to do with evil. Somebody that is not scientifically oriented at all may have sit here and listened to these things on the video and be going, none of that, I didn't go to math in the 7th grade. You know, so they don't, none of that clicks. It's okay. It's one arrow in the arsenal, in the quiver. That's why we need a lot of arrows. The moral argument appeals in a completely different way to people to consider why there's a necessity for there to be a creator, for there to be something that's an ultimate good. And we'll pick that up next week. Any questions? I know I've been dumping a lot. And we had a couple of questions along the way. Anybody have any comments or questions about it?
I hope there's not a quiz.
There's not an infinite quiz.
A fool said in his heart, there is no God, right?
You keep wanting to jump to the text. I know the verses just like you, and the one about he stretches the heavens and stuff. I understand those completely, but we're not
right near that. But near that same one is God basically says, "I sit above the inhabitants of the earth, the circle of the earth."
And how do you describe that stuff? So again, the only reason I'm not going there is if somebody thinks I don't know if God is real, appealing to the Bible does you no good. Because you have to have confidence in the Bible coming from the Creator to put any belief in what the Bible says. And so it's a circular argument once you appeal to the Bible to prove that God exists. Because the Bible came from God, and you prove that God exists this way.
Somebody like Stephen Hawking, they're not going to know that I'm talking about
That's
the Bible.
absolutely true. So listen, thank you all for joining us live. Hopefully you will join us again next week. Again, give it some time. If tonight was not your cup of tea, give it some time and see what the moral argument will be about next week. See what the argument from design will be about the week after that. The 3 weeks into the future, I've got about 15 totally different arguments to bring in. The goal, again, is to throw the spaghetti at the wall to see something that sticks and can help convince somebody, wait a minute, I hadn't thought of that before. You might be correct that there is a creator. That's our goal. Thank you again for joining us. Phil, if you don't mind, would you lead us with closing prayer again? Join us again next week.
Dear Lord, thank you for this time together to discuss our cosmological arguments and to try to understand the beginning of the universe and your role in that, Lord. And we're so appreciative, Lord, for this time. And Lord, we pray that you'll watch over all of us and bless this church and bless us and our families. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thanks for joining us.